Welcome to Sideline Sanity, presented by Legacy Precious Metals. I'm Michele Tafoya. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Check them out at legacypminvestments.com, the only company I trust, legacypminvestments.com. What would it take to get you to voluntarily resign from a big-time job? We're going to ask Jen Say why she resigned from Levi's. Next.
For nearly 3 decades, she's reported the action from the sidelines. She started very young. She's covered the NBA, NFL, Olympics, and the college football and basketball national championships. And now, during these insane times in our world, Michele Tafoya thinks we need a serious dose of sanity. This is Sideline Sanity with your host, one of the sanest people on planet Earth, Michele Tafoya.
I am really fascinated by my guest today, Jen Say. The more I looked into her history, the more I learned what an accomplished individual she is, and dating back to a very young age. And oftentimes it's those high achievers that are able to make big statements in life. And she is one of those people. Please welcome Jennifer Say. You like to go by Jen, right?
Either's fine.
Okay, great. Well, when I hearken back to being an overachiever at a very young age, you were a world class gymnast. When did you start in that sport?
I started young, at about 6. Now the kids start even younger. It's so
Yeah.
crazy to me. It was the 70s, and there weren't a ton of sports available, organized sports available to girls. So if you had a young female child that was bouncing off the walls, gymnastics was kind of, or dance, that was kind of it. It was 1975. Then Nadia Comaneci hit the scene in 1976, and she was 14 years old, and we all fell in love with her because you could relate to her. She was a child,
Yeah.
and I just loved it. And I very quickly just started to spend all my time in the gym. I mean, I started competing at 7, but not competing in the way kids do now, in the everyone gets a medal trophy kind of way, like hardcore. Started
Yeah.
competing at 7, but I loved it. I mean, what's more fun than flipping around and flying through the air, But
Right.
yeah, I started really young, and by the time I was 8 or 9, I mean, I was training probably 20 hours a week, maybe 25 every day, 4 hours, a lot.
And you loved it, which is, I'm sure,
I
why
did.
your parents were supportive of it. When did it become problematic for you? I know you had an injury in there somewhere, but this is a sport, as I've covered in the past, that body image is tremendously. I mean, there's a lot of pressure around what you weigh and how you look.
Yes, and I would say that the coaching culture is quite cruel. And so just sort of bullying and very abusive behavior is considered sort of just tough coaching. So that's one aspect of it. And then to your point, the obsession with thinness, especially in the 80s into the 90s, but even now it's still happening. The body type that's preferred has changed a little bit, but there is still this obsession. We were weighed twice a day. We were berated for gaining a quarter of a pound and punished with, extra conditioning on top of a 6-hour workout. Um, it's brutal, and it wears on you over time,
Weighs on you,
and
no pun intended. I mean,
yeah,
that's so
exactly.
wrong in so many ways. Weighing twice a day. What's the point?
Weighed and announced on the loudspeaker in the gym,
Oh
your
my
weight. And
gosh.
it would be, Jen gained a quarter of a pound today. She's got to go spend an extra hour in the plastic sweatsuit running to lose it. We don't coach fat gymnasts. So real bullying behavior. And, I would say I didn't really start to unravel until I won USA championships. Honestly, the night that I won, I sort of knew I should leave. I was like, this has got to be the best it gets. I was competing on what I found out later was a broken ankle. So pain really wears on your psyche over time.
Mhm.
I had an eating disorder that would just intensify and get worse. And I was 2 years out from the Olympics, which I was supposed to keep training for. But really, kind of was losing my mind and didn't see
Yeah.
how, 2 years is a long time in the life of a 16-year-old who's
Yeah.
falling apart.
Yeah.
And ultimately I did. I had many injuries, the worst of which was a broken femur at the World Championships in 1985. And I came back too soon from that and ended up breaking the ankle on the other side, but kept training. The window of opportunity in gymnastics is viewed as sort of very short, right? It's a
Yeah.
young person's game. And so
Mhm.
you don't want to miss a season, which forces kids to come back too soon from injuries. Now, I think the one change now versus when I did it is young women are competing longer. And, the last Olympic team, many, if not most of them, were in their early 20s. So
Right.
I think that's a good development
Yeah.
in that you know, it doesn't promote this same kind of forcing to come back too soon and train on injuries. Although it's so inculcated in the culture, it's still happening.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going to prompt the change. And then, of course, we know and we've seen from Larry Nasser and that whole horrific situation that sexual abuse in the sport is, I mean, I've been saying it for years, it's sort of rampant.
Did
It
you
is.
experience that?
I did not, but I was surrounded by it. I knew it was there. And when you
Ugh.
know it's there, the national team coach that I traveled around the world and country with, everyone sort of knew. Now, keep in mind, this was like 1984. Like, take your own mind back.
Yeah.
And we all sort of talked about it. We were kids. We didn't know what to do. If and the adults in our lives were saying, well, you don't know, so you shouldn't say anything. You'll ruin his reputation. He's a very important coach. And so you didn't. It was made very clear that this was not to be discussed. But of course, later I learned one of my close friends was being sexually assaulted by him. He's now banned from the sport.
Yeah.
But it was just, people ask, why didn't you say anything? Me, this 14-year-old kid, I don't know. It was clear to me from the adults in the room that I wasn't supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I did say something as an adult at 40 in a book I wrote, I mean, I was threatened with legal action. I was demonized and vilified and called a liar and a grifter. Now, of course, it was all true. I knew it was true, but that's what I had to put up with at 40. I don't
Yeah.
know that I could have withstood that at 14.
I've got a 13-year-old daughter and I'm trying to picture her being in that position. It's a very tough time in a kid's life and a very confusing time. And it's hard to know what we would all do in the shoes of a 14-year-old surrounded by that. So I will, say to those who criticize, you have no idea what it's like to be in that person's shoes until you're there, and you're likely not going to be there. So maybe be quiet. But
Yeah,
anyway, you
exactly.
ended up you ended up going to Stanford, again, another high achievement, and I think you double majored, correct?
I did. I double majored in political science and communication, which is a degree that people like to mock, but but
Yes,
that's
they
okay.
do.
Yeah, I didn't really know what I wanted. I was a smart kid, but I didn't know it. I had spent my life thinking about sports and gymnastics. I was not a very curious student or engaged student. I knew how to get good grades and, tick that box, but I wasn't a particularly engaged student, if you see what I mean. And I'd gone to
I do.
three different high schools. So, my academic high school career was confusing and sort of incomplete at best, but I managed to get myself into Stanford not on a sports scholarship, just applying like a regular person.
Right.
And I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I was super insecure. Everybody seemed so smart, and I just felt stupid, for
Oh,
most. Yeah, as with often, a lot of women, type A, have imposter syndrome, and I had it in
yeah.
droves.
Yeah. Yeah. I am right there with you. Boy, I'm relating to you on a lot of levels right now, Jen. Well, when we come back from this quick break, I want to talk to Jen about coming out of Stanford and the things she felt a calling to do, because they're quite diverse, they're fascinating, and they led her to where she is right now, which is a remarkable position. Back in 1 second. Hey, it is summer grilling season, and if you're looking for the perfect cuts to put on the grill, Look no further. Here is your answer. Ready? Good Ranchers. It's the place to get American beef, chicken, and seafood this summer. They sell 100% American meat and ship it straight to your door. And right now, they're giving away 2 free 18-ounce prime center cut ribeyes to every person that uses the code TAFOYA, TAFOYA. That's over 2 pounds of prime ribeye steaks just added to your order at no cost to you. You're welcome. With Father's Day coming up and all the other summer events, there has never been a better time to try a box of Good Ranchers. Everybody needs these ribeyes. You can make a one-time purchase or go ahead and subscribe. You'll save $25 on every box. Plus, like I said earlier, you'll get 2 free 18-ounce boneless ribeyes. These things are restaurant quality. Other places would charge you well over $50, $60 a steak to get ribeyes like these, but Good Ranchers is giving them to you for free when you go to goodranchers.com/Tafoya, Tafoya. They are out of their ranching minds. Not the time to wait. Claim your ribeyes today. This is a limited stock item, first come, first serve, and you want to be first when it comes to Good Ranchers. They deliver the best of American farms and ranches to your door. Make sure you take time today. Right now, go to goodranchers.com/Tafoya or use my code Tafoya, Tafoya, at checkout to get your 2 free 18-ounce ribeyes. Start the summer off right with Good Ranchers, American meat delivered. We're back with Jennifer Say. So you come out of Stanford, Jen, and you've got this, dual degree, poli-sci communications. You're not sure what to do, but you went on to do incredible things. I know when you walk out of college with that degree, there's a lot of, not all of us know exactly what we're going to be doing with the rest of our lives. So how did you begin? Where did you start?
I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was still confused. I'd spent 16 years or something doing gymnastics, and now I was, it was this thing I loved that I could no longer do. You can't make an adult career of it. And I was sort of bitter about that because I had friends that I met at Stanford that were now tennis players,
Oh,
professional football, professional baseball. And I was as good as they were in my sport, but I couldn't do that. And
right.
I had tremendous insecurity. I thought I wanted to do creative things like write and make films, but I had no confidence to be able to do that and had not really pursued that at Stanford. But I also was fiercely independent and I did not want to ask my parents for any help. Um, and it was sort of a recession, right? It was 1992. It was tough and I couldn't pay my rent. And so I took a job at an advertising agency. Goodness knows how I came upon that. And I really did not want to work in business. I thought that was not for me, but I found a community there. It was young people, it was creative, and I had
Yeah.
fun and I was good at it, which I get sucked in by like the praise of being good at something. And so
Right.
I remember the night I took the job at this advertising agency, I said, I won't be doing this in 5 years. Lo and behold, over 30 years later, I was the CMO at Levi's for 8 years and ultimately the brand president. So I did keep doing it. But along the way, I did write a book and make a film. So I kind of ended up squeeze it while working full time at Levi's. So I got to pursue those things as my confidence built.
Right.
I did pursue the things I ultimately had wanted to do initially.
The film is interesting to me. It was 2020, correct? You guys won an Emmy for this as an
Yeah,
investigative
yeah.
documentary. Athlete A, really delving into this culture you talked about before. How did that come about? I mean, you're working at Levi's and suddenly this documentary comes up.
So I wrote a book in 2008 called Chalked Up, and it was really the first person account of the abusive culture in gymnastics. Nobody else had talked about it. I didn't realize how controversial that would be. I sort of thought everybody knew. It was kind of an open secret, but it was supposed to be a secret, which I was naive enough not to know. And I was punished for that. But then ultimately, I kind of became like the one person who was willing to talk about it. So every time there was a case of abuse in any sport that came out, I would be called by, the networks, et cetera. Or if journalists were investigating abuse in sport, especially gymnastics, I would be called. And so as the Nasser story was breaking, I knew the journalists and I knew a lot of the people involved. And so and I had worked with the civil attorney in that case to kind of help him understand what is the culture that kind of bred this and allowed for this to happen. And so, somewhere around 2018, maybe late 17, I thought, this is a film. We need to make this into a film so people understand what happened. And my intent in concepting the film was to connect Larry Nassar, who is the most prolific pedophile, I think, in American history, definitely in sport, to the broader culture of abuse, because USA Gymnastics and the US Olympic Committee were very anxious to sort of dismiss this as a he's just one bad dude and now he's in
Yeah.
prison. It's nothing to see here. And I wanted to make the connection between the culture that is incredibly cruel and abusive, and that is what allowed for this man to do what he did for over 30 years, for all kinds of reasons. And so I had concepted the film, and then I went and found directors for it, and had a lot of the context of the people that were featured.
It's amazing. The story is, I think, so sickening. Some people just almost can't get their minds around it. You know what I mean? It's just astonishing. And then when you see some of these prominent gymnasts talking about it, you ask yourself, are you telling me that this happy little gymnast who's down there on the beam smiling and performing at a level that we can't even begin to imagine? As you know, the tricks have gotten so much more difficult
Crazy.
over the years, and they're smiling and then they're triumphant at the end, and this shit is going on behind the scenes. It's staggering, Jennifer.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, to just sort of illustrate the point I was making about the culture of abuse, like these kids are like obedience, silence and obedience is just drilled into you.
Yeah.
There is no, how do you feel today? Does your body feel good? Okay, let's figure out what this day, like there is none of that. It's get out there, do the thing I told you to. You think you're in pain because your ankle hurts, and they're like, you're a lazy piece of garbage. You think you're hungry because you haven't eaten in 2 days to try to make weight, and they tell you you're a fat pig, literally using that language. So that's very disorienting for a young person, right? Because
Oh my God.
you think one thing, and then you're told another. It's typical abusive behavior. Like if
Mhm.
a mom or a parent is hitting the child and says, I wouldn't have to hit you if you weren't bad. It's
Yeah.
that dynamic. And so if a child or a young woman walks into Larry Nassar's office and says, my wrist hurts, and he sexually abuses her under the guise of treatment, she's thinking, this doesn't seem right. But she, she already doesn't trust her view and her perception of the world. And
Yeah.
in many ways is incredibly mature, and in other ways is incredibly immature because you're just
Mhm.
sheltered in the gym. And she
Yeah.
doesn't say anything, but it continues to haunt her. She knows this wasn't right. Um, and so that's what I mean by this culture of abuse. There's no helping the child to develop a sense of herself. It's sort of beating that out of her in a sense, emotionally and physically. None of the things, like that's exactly the opposite of what sport is supposed to do,
Yeah,
right? It's
right.
supposed to encourage health development of healthy bodies and minds,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that is not the culture in gymnastics. And so it's horrifying to me that Larry Nassar was able to abuse hundreds and hundreds of girls. It isn't surprising to me that he was
Ugh.
able to do that within this culture, which sounds really grotesque, but it's not surprising to me. And I certainly knew coaches that engaged in this behavior for decades.
Oh, it's maddening. I remember I really only covered gymnastics one time in my career when I was at CBS Sports, and here's what stood out to me. When I'd go to interview the gymnasts after they did something, we would have noticed, oh, she changed that tumbling pass that she was practicing all week. She changed it. So I'd ask, what happened to change your tumbling pass, or you decided not to include this trick? The answer was identical from every girl in every
Yeah.
interview. I was just out there trying to have fun. I just wanted to go out and have fun. And
What does
none of
that
them
tell you?
seemed, yeah. And none of them seemed joyous. They just were repeating this line. It was robotic. And
It's
I
weird.
it was very sad.
Yeah, that's kind of what they're told, right? Because USA Gymnastics and the US Olympic Committee, I mean, women's gymnastics is the most watched sport in the Summer Olympics. Now,
Yes.
nobody watches it in between. Nobody
Yeah.
cares in between, but it's the most watched sport. That means it's a cash cow, right? That
Yeah.
it makes
Yeah.
money for the network, and everyone was very invested in the image that you just described, these sort of happy little pixies bouncing around and having fun. Nobody wanted to reveal the dark side, especially if it involved sexual assault, and all the other stuff I described. Miserable children training on broken bones. Nobody wants that revealed. And so, what happened with Larry Nasser was the cover up was, I won't say worse than the crime in this instance, but there were a lot of people at USA Gymnastics, US Olympic Committee, and now we know at the FBI that were complicit in letting this go and not investigating. There has been no accountability for that to date. None.
Do you think it will ever happen again?
I think it's very possible. I don't think the culture has changed. I, I, I mean, I sure hope not, but I think it's very possible. And the Safe Sport Act has been established since the Larry Nasser incident. They're overwhelmed with reports of abuse, sexual abuse. They can't even handle, they don't even take the calls on emotional and physical abuse. Like, no one's
Yeah.
gotten to that yet,
Oh my
which,
gosh.
it's interesting. The emails and letters I get, the emotional and physical abuse has lasting impacts. I mean, some of these women into their 40s even are still suffering. And part of the problem is they didn't even recognize that that was abuse. They think they turned on themselves, that they are weak because they've suffered
Yeah.
from this treatment.
Yes.
So I don't know. I hope it would never happen again, but I don't know. Some of these people are still coaching. The old guard
Yeah.
needs to go.
Well, so much publicity has been out there, and some really brave gymnasts, including you, who have been willing to come forward and expose this. I do want to go on the record and say, I have a sister in law who was a competitive gymnast at the college level, did very, very well at the national level. Not everyone goes through this
No,
experience.
I
I think
agree.
there's a lot of parental engagement for some of these people.
That's right.
She certainly came through it healthy. I mean, there are some college programs that are fabulous
I
that,
completely agree.
yeah. So,
And I
but
had a I had a
go ahead.
coach when I was about 10 to 13 before I went to the club where I finished my career. Amazing woman. I mean, I
Yeah.
qualified for the elite level there, which is the highest level. She really cared about the whole child. Her goal was to raise us into, strong young women who knew ourselves and, who felt more confident having done sport, not less. So there are amazing, incredible coaches out there. There's just too many bad ones.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh, it's very disheartening. But Athlete A is the documentary that Jennifer Say was part of, a huge part of creating and helping expose this issue. So, what happened when she found her inner activist about COVID and kids not being able to go to school? We'll talk about that next. Oh my goodness, friends. Since last November, the stock market has plummeted. I looked at it again today. Holy smokes. The thing is, gold has been on the rise. Gas prices are insane. The stock market is extremely volatile. Inflation is even worse than it was a year ago. And now we have this war between Russia and Ukraine. We pray it doesn't extend to any place else in the world. The bottom line is the markets, they don't like instability. But the good news is you have options. Gold prices are rising as investors turn to gold for protection. Gold provides a hedge against inflation and protects against a weakening dollar. So, Legacy Precious Metals is the only company that I trust when investing in gold and silver. You need an investment that's going to protect your wealth and retirement. Call Legacy Precious Metals today. Be proactive while there's still time. Because remember 2008? Those who invested in gold saw huge gains, while others, they lost their retirements. Legacy Precious Metals can advise you on all your options for investing in gold and silver. And you can speak to an IRA expert at Legacy Precious Metals at 866 528 1903. 866 528 1903. Just call them and ask your questions. What do you got to lose? Or download their free investor's guide at legacypminvestments.com. Legacypminvestments.com. So Jen Say became maybe even more famous because we're in this social media age when in San Francisco, where she was living and working for Levi's, she was Well, I'll let you describe it, Jen. How did you feel about schools closing down initially surrounding the COVID? We were all that March of 2020. No one knew what was going on. We were all just sort of protective. What happened from there for you?
Well, I was very concerned about the schools closing from the very beginning. I understood in the spring of 2020, but it became clear to me just a few weeks in that schools were becoming hyper politicized. I
What did
can't
you see
remember.
that made that clear to you? Because I'm not sure
Well,
every parent saw that. Certainly, I would see it in San Francisco, but what did you see?
well, I'm not sure when it was that Trump said schools needed to open. I think that might have been in like June 2020. I might be getting the date wrong, so forgive
That's
me.
okay.
And that just sent everybody into their corners, right? As soon
Yeah.
as he
Yeah.
said that, it was like schools can never open.
Yeah.
Um, and at this point, European countries were already, I mean, as early as May 2020, European countries were prioritizing opening schools. Denmark,
Yeah.
Sweden never closed primary schools. They started opening secondary schools. So I was just reading. I mean, the irony is people mock people like me for doing their own research.
I
I
know.
assure you, I've read way more than any person should ever read on this unless they work in public health or an epidemiologist. And I clicked every link, I read every study, and the age stratification of risk was very clear in April
Mhm.
2020. Kids
Mhm.
were mercifully protected. Not only were they protected, but they were far less likely to spread it, which is why European countries said, you know what, we need to prioritize children here. Um, and so I just became increasingly alarmed. Now I have four children, all public school students. Two of them are older, and one was in college. One just graduated from Berkeley, which is, I think, where you went, if I'm not
It is.
mistaken.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But I have two, so I have a 21, 19, and then I have a 7 and 5. So subtract 2.5 years to go back to the beginning of COVID. But I've always been a believer in the public school system. So I always have sent my kids to public school. We're part of the city we live in. We're part of that community. I don't want to raise my kids in a bubble. I don't want to cordon them off from the city. And so I felt like I just I never thought any different than to send my kids to public school. So I became increasingly alarmed when it became clear that private schools were going to open in the fall, and they
Mm.
did in San Francisco and many places, and public schools stayed persistently shut. And it had become increasingly political. Anyone who, raised the fact that children were being harmed was called a racist,
Yeah.
an anti-science, whatever. And then in the spring of 21, we public health had said once vaccination is available, teachers can get vaccinated, then they'll definitely open. They still didn't open.
Yep.
And so, but I was outspoken the entire time. And I actually started speaking out about playgrounds being closed. They were closed for 9 months in San Francisco.
I mean, and these are outdoor playgrounds, right?
Outdoor
Where
playgrounds, which,
outdoors, this place where you're supposed to be just fine.
yeah, although everything possible was done in San Francisco to get people to stay home. Beach parking lots were closed, hiking trails were closed, which was the worst possible strategy by
Yeah.
public health, but they just wanted
Yes.
people to stay at home. Um, you were penalized, at a certain point in the spring, you were allowed to go outside, but only with your household. Um, People were calling the police on people that they suspected were outdoors with people outside of their household. It was just such a gross environment. But I can't explain it, Michelle. People ask me why. Like, why did you do it? It just seems so grossly unjust to me
Mhm.
that poor children, basically, my children aren't poor, but they go to public school, were being shut out of getting an education, which we know, education is tied to life years. It's tied to what you'll earn later in life. If a child can't read by the third grade, they're 4 times less likely to graduate from high school. Like, it wasn't just 2 weeks or 2 months. This, for many children, could mean a lifetime of challenge and despair and achieving much less than what they could have. And I just couldn't get past that. I don't
Yeah.
know, and I
Yeah.
knew at a certain point, and I spoke out about it on social media, and I wrote opinion pieces, and I was on local news and ultimately national news. And I had a very prominent job at the time. I was the at first this chief marketing officer at Levi's, and then in the middle of all this became the brand president. And I was warned that I should stop, that this was not something that should be said. It was too controversial. I was being called a racist and an anti-science whatever internally, and the complaints just got ratcheted up. But amidst all of that, and I certainly debated with myself, like, is it worth it?
Mhm.
But I just kept going back to myself as a child in gymnastics and the inhumane treatment, and wishing some adult had stood up for me.
Yeah. And so you stood up for kids you knew, kids you didn't know, and I felt the same way. I thought, I know my kids have access to Zoom. They can sit there. I can help do some of this stuff because I'm around. What about these kids who knows what their home life is like? They don't have the technology, they don't have the parental love, they don't have the support, they don't have the books around them.
They're
It
home
sickened me.
alone. Yeah,
Yeah, and they're
it
totally alone.
it doesn't take much imagination to understand
No.
what this was like. And I couldn't understand all these people, these privileged people, screaming about equity and equality and all of it. And this is the most unequal thing. They're sending their kids to $50,000 a year private schools,
Mhm.
and they're screaming at me that I am the horrible racist and bigot for thinking public schools should be open. So, and there was a lot of complexity in San Francisco. The Board of Education was basically refusing to deal with the issue. And in
Yeah.
February of 2022, they were recalled, three of the
Right.
members decisively. So
Yep.
you had the teachers unions, who are very powerful in San Francisco. You had Governor Newsom, who really did nothing to get the schools open. I will say our mayor tried. It wasn't. She sued the school district to
We're
open the
talking about Mayor
schools.
London Breed,
Yeah,
correct?
I mean, she
Mhm.
did. She did try. But it was just a confluence of circumstance. And it didn't help, frankly, that we have really vilified children and stigmatized them as the spreaders and these like diseased individuals. And so, is it surprising that teachers were scared? I guess not. Is it surprising that some parents were very scared to send their children to school? I guess not. So I feel like public health did a tremendous disservice by
Yes.
stigmatizing children in this way, because if they hadn't done that, and if they had reflected reality, which is children are mercifully um, basically spared,
Yeah.
and are less likely to pass it on and even give it to teachers, people wouldn't have been so afraid to send their kids to school, and all of this could have been bypassed. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I couldn't shut my mouth, and I ended up without a job. That's
Well,
basically what happened.
you couldn't shut your mouth, which I applaud you. I am so grateful for the courage you had to do this. At what point then did it become too much for Levi's to have you continuing to talk, and how did the breakup transpire?
Well, like I said, folks had been folks, different people. My boss, who was the CEO, different people, HR, CorpCom, had been talking to me throughout, and they acknowledged fully that they couldn't tell me I had to stop. We had no
Right.
sort of social media mandate that said you can't talk about these things. I had talked about politics in the past. It's just
Mhm.
that those politics were more aligned with the companies. I had
Yes.
criticized Trump,
Yeah.
and that was all fine. It
Yeah.
was when I started criticizing Newsom that was not considered okay. And,
Yeah.
I was told overtly not to talk about the governor recall.
Oh.
But anyway, at a certain point around October 2021, my boss actually had the conversation with me that was, you could be the CEO, but you have to stop this. And I was like, you know, you say that, but it's probably too late. I mean, in the age of screen grabs and, all of this,
Yeah.
and then I started getting called out by people with, more significant numbers of followers. And I think their feeling was, it didn't impact our business. Our business was great. We had recovered really quickly from COVID, which was obviously very difficult and a hard time when all your stores are closed.
Yeah.
Um, but it was this idea that it could impact the business, right? Because I was being too controversial. Ultimately, I agreed to a background check, which is sort of standard operating procedure if you're in the running for CEO. And it was determined in probably December of 2021 that based on the background check, everything I had said around schools and children was just too controversial, and so I could not hold the position of CEO, which meant I also could not hold the position that I currently held as brand president, because that is a feeder role, in
Yeah.
corporate parlance. And so I couldn't sit in that seat if I was not, in fact, a candidate. So they told me, basically I was being laid off. I would be given severance. I knew that when you accept a severance package, you have to sign an NDA about the terms of your separation.
A
I did,
non-disclosure agreement, just in
yeah.
case
I mean,
anyone knows.
they're at this point denying, but I've given hundreds of severance packages, if not thousands. I was there 23 years. I
Yeah.
know you sign an NDA about the terms of the separation. No, they
Okay.
couldn't stop me speaking out about schools and kids, but they could stop me from speaking out about the terms of the separation. And I did not want that, because I feel like this is a really important subject.
Yeah.
Employees are citizens. They have a right to speak out about the things they care about. And I did
Yeah.
not want to be silenced on the matter. So I quit in a very public, bridge burning fashion.
But you know what? Where one bridge burns, another is built, I guess, so that had to be extremely difficult. That meant that you rejected the severance, correct? The
I
pay?
did.
Yeah,
I
which
did.
was reportedly $1 million. That's not easy to walk away from, Jen. I don't care who you are. And I know a lot of people who make a lot of money who would have a very tough time walking away from an extra million, especially when you're walking into the unknown. What did that unknown look like to you in that moment?
Well, I had sort of 2 years leading up to this. It was a very difficult 2 years. I mean, I had been there 23 years. I had lived in San Francisco for over 30. This was my community, or so I thought. But, my taking the stand, I was rejected by everyone and everything I ever knew. I was rejected as this like alt-right, insane
Ugh.
conspiracy theorist because I had a view that was heterodox to the Democratic Party.
Mhm.
And at that point, it was like I started to question everything. The scales
Yeah.
from my eyes fell. And I just didn't understand it, because I felt I was being true to my values and what I
Mhm.
thought were the values of the Democratic Party. I thought public education, care for, these lower income children, access to public education as a right. I thought all these things were that's why I was part of this party. So, the hard part, yes, the money was difficult, especially because I am stepping into the unknown and I don't really know what the future holds for me. But the just the walking away from my community, everyone I knew in San Francisco, my friends, at Levi's, I had so many friends. I've talked to no one since then. I'm a pariah. That's
Ugh.
hard. That's difficult. But I couldn't not do it. And I moved from, or not moved, I expanded from kids are being harmed and we need to pay attention to this, which, by the way, all the headlines and the studies reinforce now. So I was right.
Absolutely. Absolutely they do. Hands down.
But I became increasingly concerned during this time about the stifling and the suppression of debate and dissent, because if there was this false scientific consensus created around the need for schools to be closed. People were out there saying that they didn't. Very
Right.
respectable doctors and public
Mhm.
health folks, they were vilified. And
Yeah.
so I just became increasingly alarmed about the stifling of dissent and debate.
Yeah.
And I was part of that. And I was vilified and cast aside as just sort of too far off the rails to be part of a polite society, let alone
Yeah.
hold a job in a corporation. And we've got to talk about this. It just sort of
Yeah.
now has become almost like my life's mission we've got to overcome this. We have to
Yeah.
be able to talk to each other. You and I think, agree on a lot. We probably disagree on a lot. That's
Mhm.
fine. We
Mhm.
should still be able to talk to each other,
Well,
right?
and start by building on the things upon which we agree, which there are a number of them right here in this conversation. And yes, we probably disagree on some as well, but you and I are talking right now. I was a guest on a podcast recently where I was just ambushed out of the gate. They had decided what they thought of me, and they hated my ideas, my thoughts, whatever. And a lot of it does have to do with this free speech, dissent, being able to debate civilly. I think the thing that scares me the most right now, when people are getting canceled, however you want to define that, fired, fined for what they say, that doesn't comport with the First Amendment. And the First Amendment is the First Amendment for a really, really good reason. And so no matter how much you hate what someone else has to say, they still have the right to say it and not to be punished. I realize there are private, here's the thing. People would say to me, yeah, with all due respect, Michelle, the First Amendment does not apply to corporations. A corporation like Levi's, like whomever, can say, you know what, we don't want you talking about this, and you refuse to not,
Gotta go.
conform, so we can let you go. Where do you fall
But
on that part of it?
look, there's a difference. I understand. I'm not a moron. Like, I understand the difference between the First Amendment, which is basically that the government cannot prevent
Right,
your right to speak freely, and a culture of free speech.
right.
Both are important. And so, if we talk about free speech, if I talk about it, I'm talking about the culture of free speech that is so
Correct. Yeah.
important. And it's
Yeah.
important in corporations, it's important in academia, it's important in the sciences. And I fear if we don't sort of actively promote this culture of free speech, and I'll talk about the business world specifically, but obviously academia is rife with it, we all
Yes.
become dumber. I mean, the
Yeah.
fact is,
Yeah.
we just become dumber because there just becomes this group think, and you just all agree with the thing that the person said who you're supposed to agree with. Well,
Right.
that person is wrong a lot.
Uh-huh.
And there's much written in about corporate cultures that are sort of guru led. That's incredibly problematic because the guru is wrong sometimes. And if you've
Mhm.
created this culture where everyone just has to agree, and disagreeing with the guru, the CEO is wrong think, when that person is wrong, the business crumbles. And I can
Yeah.
name scores of examples of this in business. And in something like COVID, where the scientific consensus was fabricated, it was truly fabricated by silencing the voices of dissenters. And they were wrong, not just on schools. They were wrong on surface spread. They were wrong on playground. I mean, I could go on
Yeah.
and on. And you can't get to the truth when debate is silenced in this way.
Correct.
And so that's why I find it so alarming, because we all will become stupider if we
Yeah.
can't it can. And you know what, bad ideas sink like a stone. So why are you afraid of them? Like, let them.
Exactly. Let them be out there, let them be exposed so you can all go, "Boy, that's a really bad idea. Now that's talked about. Let's leave that by the wayside and go look for other ideas." It's so commonsensical what you're saying and presenting here. And that is what is so scary, that there is this large swath of people who can't get their mind around it. So, before we go, and I'd love to talk to you again because there is so much to discuss with you, Jen. And I again, I applaud your courage. This is not something everyone can do, right? It's just
Stupidity might be a better
no, no,
word,
no, no,
but
no, 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 no. No, that's not how it will be remembered. Trust me. Um, w- so to me, part of the solution
is more
is
speech.
peop is absolutely more speech. I always. And also people like you and the courage, and we have to like formulate somehow this collective courage to stand by each other when we are going to have that courage, even standing by some who we disagree with, but who have the courage to proclaim what they believe and say, you know
That's
what,
right.
I don't agree, but I, I stand by your right to say it.
Yes.
So how do we build this? I feel like you are part of the platform upon which we can maybe build this cultural change. What do you think?
You're exactly right. It's people like us who sort of model the behavior,
Yeah.
who have the moral courage to stand up for what they believe in, who have the empathy to listen to others
Mhm,
that they might disagree with, and to forge bridges and to
mhm.
to forge partnerships. That's the only way. And
Yeah.
I at some point I think I'll probably work in corporate America again. I'm not doing it right now. I was surprised to learn that people were interested in me as a leader after all of this. And here's what I would do when I start on day one. I would say, this is a culture where all ideas are welcome. The best ideas will win. Um, if that's not, and that's true for the ideas as they pertain to the business. Individuals are free to express themselves outside of work. They will not be punished for that. If you don't like that, this may not be a place for you. I would just start by saying that I want to
Yeah.
create an inclusive culture. Yes, racially inclusive, gender, all of it, but viewpoint inclusive
Yeah.
as well. So I would
Yes.
just start there. The people who want that will work there. The people who don't want that won't. To me, from the very beginning, this whole thing could have been handled so differently. You
Oh,
know, the CEO could have said, you might disagree with Jen. That's okay. She's a mom. She gets to, this is what she is called to do, to stand up for children. And you know what? If they would have waited 3 or 4 months, I would have looked heroic,
yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Now they're probably going, oh my God, did we whiff there? Well, it's like, I don't know how familiar you are with the recent comments of Jack Del Rio, who's the defensive coordinator for the Washington football team, now called the
Mm-mm.
Commanders. And he spoke out about, comparing January 6th to the George Floyd riots and got in a lot of trouble. He kind of walked it back, apologized. Ultimately, the team, the coach, fined him $100,000. I know the coach very well, Ron Rivera. He's a Cal grad as well and was a senior when I was a freshman there. I've known Ron for many years. I love him. But I think what would have been better, with all due respect, is if he had come out and said, Jack Del Rio is a member of our coaching staff. We appreciate everything he does for this defense and our players. He has a frame of mind that is he has an opinion that is protected by the First Amendment, and we respect that in this organization. Our organization does not necessarily agree with Jack,
Right.
but we agree with the ability for him to speak. End of story.
Then
Let
it's
it
done.
go. Then it's done.
Well, and I think that there's just a failure in sort of leadership and courageous leadership. And when you
Yes.
see leaders do it, it's fine and it all
Yeah.
goes away. I mean, Netflix just
Yes.
said they haven't taken Chappelle down. They
Right.
said we believe we're a platform for content. We support content from various ranges of perspectives, and if you don't like that, don't work here. And
Right.
it's done. Spotify hasn't taken Rogan down. They
Right.
weathered the storm. They didn't take it down. He didn't bend a knee. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
And yes, I know Netflix's stock is down, but everybody's stock is down. So, I'm not relating it to this. And it's like, it's not as bad as
No.
what you imagine it would
No,
be.
it's not. In fact, it's been applauded. I think when you sound much more inclusive when you say that, in my opinion. You sound like someone who is brave enough to say, "You know what? The ideas are welcome here." And by the way, Dave Chappelle does really well on our platform. So we're
Right.
going to that's a that's a success and we want to foster success. So we're going to leave that right where it is. And by the way, if you want to work in that environment as you said, Jen, great. If you don't, maybe this isn't the place for you. And I think that is beyond fair.
And then it's done.
And
And
then it's
the
done.
employees can decide. They can choose if they want to work there or not. But, frankly, these leaders, these CEOs, they're afraid of
Yes.
these kids. They're afraid of them. And the other thing I would say is the new face of business, like it used to be back in the day, that it was fine. Like businesses were, it was clear they were in it to make money.
Yeah.
That was the point, which is still the point, by the way,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Yeah.
let's not kid ourselves. That is the
Yeah.
point. That's your fiduciary obligation to shareholders. But they don't want to be kind of lumped in with oil CEOs, right? Like they're
Mhm.
the new face of capitalism. And they
Right.
are it's this kind, generous, caring capitalism that does good in the world. That's what they want people to believe. And so they're afraid, honestly, of these young people that come in and say, these words are violence.
Yeah.
And you don't need to be afraid. You can be empathetic to that view and also empathetic and inclusive to other views. You
Yep.
can do both. I don't think it's nearly as complicated, and I think the world will move there. Honestly, I do, but it's just a little painful getting there.
Yeah, yeah, but we're seeing some change, and I'm pleased to see it. I hope it catches on. One thing I'm pretty confident of, and I'm not just saying this because you're a guest of mine today. Whatever your next step is going to be, you're going to rock it. You are going to end up in leadership because you do have that courage. It is valued, and people down deep know that it is that kind of courage and principle that leads to big and powerful things and success. and it's needed more than ever right now in the world, but specifically in this country. And so, Jen Say, I can't wait to see what your next move is. I really
Well,
can't, because I know it's going to be awesome. I know it's going to matter. So good on you.
well, thanks. In the near term, I'm writing a book and I'm making another documentary, and then I'll figure out what's next after that.
What's the documentary about?
It's about the impact to kids and families of this long-term school closures, and
Yeah.
it's devastating. I mean, I've been interviewing families across the country. It's devastating, and it's not just the lower income kids, or middle and even upper. The mental health impacts
Mental health.
of kids being in their rooms for a year and a half on a
Yeah.
screen, it's
Yeah.
not good. I
It's
mean,
not
everybody knows
good.
at this point, but
Yeah.
I'm going to do that first and then I'll figure out the next part. We're both on a next step journey here, so I wish you luck as well.
Thank you. And the book, what's the next book about? Same thing?
It's a memoir. No, it's different.
Oh.
It's really more about how do you find the courage to use your voice
Ugh.
when because it's we say use your voice. It's like a platitude, but it's really hard. You
Mhm.
know, how do you withstand the blowback? How do you withstand being ejected by your friends and your colleagues? But you're right, courage begets courage. And
Yeah.
I kept going back to, having spoken out about abuse in sport, and ultimately everybody found I was correct, but I had to
Yeah.
wait 10 years for that. And so I sort of rooted myself in that. And, the letters I get from young athletes who were able to report their abuser because they read the book and it gave them, courage,
Ugh.
like that sort of keeps you going. It's a cliche, but
Yes.
it does keep you going.
So that's what I wanna ask you last thing before I let you go. Just I'm talking about all your courage and your strength. How are you doing? Because I've been there to a lesser degree than what you've gone through, of being vilified, of being called things that aren't so about you, of being rejected by certain people that you thought you connected with or were your friends. How are you doing?
That's a nice question. um, I'm I'm okay to good. I have great days. I'm super proud of the work that I'm doing now. I'm excited about the projects I have. Um, but it's hard. I left my city that I loved. I live in Denver now. I left my community. None of them speak to me. That's very hard. My husband is my saving grace here.
Yeah.
I have never met a person who cared less what others thought of him, like truly does not care.
Yeah.
I'm like the only person he cares what I think of him.
Right.
And so throughout the whole thing, he would say, "Why do you care what they
Yes.
think? They're
Yes.
wrong.
Yeah.
They're wrong.
Yeah.
They're not only incorrect on the facts, they're exhibiting tremendous cowardice and they're not being good friends to you. So why do you care?" And he's right, but
Yeah.
I I need him to, encourage that in me, because I do care. And
Uh,
I do. I'm overcoming that, and I don't want to fully overcome it, right? Yeah, I want my kids, I want to care what my kids think of me as a
yeah.
mom. I want to care that my friends think I'm a good friend. Um, but these people were not coming from an intellectually honest place.
Right.
It was about groupthink or wrongthink, and it was cowardly. And so, no, I have to get to the place where I don't care what they think of me. But
Correct. You
but it's
do. Yeah.
difficult,
It is it's difficult, and I think it's meant to be difficult, but there comes a lot of strength in overcoming it. Have you read The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday?
No, but I'm gonna check it out.
Yes, you are. I am prescribing this book to
The
you, young lady.
obstacle is the
Is
way.
the
I'm gonna
Way
read
by
it.
Ryan Holiday. I think you will appreciate it immensely.
I
It is
agree
about
with the title.
Yes. Yes, and it is about stoicism, but it's brought forward through really modern stories, and
Interesting.
it's 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 become a rock for me. And so I would recommend it, just in terms of figuring that part out, that
Yeah.
what you think of yourself and where you stand in your life and your values. It's philosophical, it's not really self-help, but ultimately it makes you stronger. I can't recommend it enough, and I say that to anybody else. The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. He's written 3 books on stoicism, and they're all fascinating. Ego is the Enemy, and Silence is Oh, shoot, I'm forgetting the last one. I'll correct
I'll
that
check it
later, but
out.
check it out, Ryan Holiday.
I
Jen,
completely agree.
you do. The
I
obstacle is the way.
don't you I feel like that's part of the problem with the way children are raised today is
Yeah.
the parents are removing all the obstacles and they're
Yes.
not very strong or tough.
Yes.
I've been very conscious of not removing all the obstacles for my children.
Yep.
Um, they don't have built-in obstacles because they do come from, a, a degree of privilege, but I'm not going to do their work for them and I'm
Yeah.
not going to solve their problems for
Right.
them. And
Right.
these kids, they show up in colleges and companies and they want everyone to solve their problems for them. And
Yeah.
that's part of the issue here. They don't
Yeah.
really have any resilience.
Mhm. Mhm. They don't have that courage to solve problems for themselves, look at obstacles as opportunities, and weather the storms that need to be weathered from the time you're born to the day you die. And so I
Which
just
doesn't
just been a
mean, sorry, one last, doesn't mean because there's a line too, right? Like what I
yes,
described in gymnastics, like,
yes,
so
yes,
that's the challenge is finding
yeah.
like what's the appropriate level of challenge for a child and where does it cross over, right?
Right, right. And I think inherently we kind of all know what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong, and so we have to just find those guideposts and
Yeah,
live within them. But
that's right.
um I just love your story. I love your courage, and I honestly can't wait to see what's next. I will read the book. I will see the film. She is Jennifer Say. Look out for all of her work because it's meaningful, it's important, and we need it from everyone else too. So join her in the courageous courage. Yeah, that was really weak and awkward, but I kind of meant it to be. Jennifer, thank you so much. This
Thank
has
you,
been,
Michelle.
you got it. This is Sideline Sanity. I'm Michelle Tafoya. See you tomorrow. So, with the economy the way that it is, which is not great, makes you think about what is smart investing these days. I was given a gift of gold by my mom. My husband and I were gifted some gold for a wedding anniversary, and we're really grateful. And I am really grateful to Charles Thorngren, who joins us now from Legacy Precious Metals, a sponsor of Sideline Sanity. Charles, we appreciate you so much. We're hearing more and more about how inflation ain't transitory after all, and it may be here a while. And food shelves are getting, the lines are longer. This is really, it's not the America I grew up in, and it's worrying a lot of people. So if someone's thinking about investing, what do you tell them?
It's an interesting conversation. Investing nowadays, we want to go back to kind of the basics, really, where diversification has always been key, and we hear it. We've been told it ad nauseum. Diversify, diversify, and then everyone puts all their money in the stock market and wonders why, when there's a pullback, they're in trouble. Diversity means asset class diversity as well. Some real estate, some precious metals. These are the things that gives your portfolio the legs to stand through all the storms that will happen financially. And we know that they happen. They happen continuously and they recur. So that's what diversity is truly meant to do. And that's why people used to talk about diversity.
So when people see the value of the dollar declining or they see inflation, how do you get the average person like me to understand that gold can still be appreciating or that gold can
Right.
protect against that stuff? How does that make sense for people?
The easiest way to look at it is if you look at gold, right? Gold is the anti-dollar investment. As a dollar gets weaker, gold gets stronger. And we know that because it takes more dollars to buy that gold, just like cars cost more now, right? Anytime you have inflation, the item that you're buying costs more. The difference with gold is that it doesn't devalue. It's considered a alternative currency. Basically, when you say that I don't have complete faith that this financial system is not built on a house of cards, or I don't have complete faith in what the current Fed is doing to fight inflation, this is where gold comes in. And this is where we see people increase their amount of gold because a diversified portfolio should have some gold regardless. We need to remember that the United States Fed says 2 to 3% inflation is ideal. So that means for the average saver, if your retirement account's invested and it's based in dollars, that you're going to lose 60% of your purchasing power to inflation by the time you're ready to retire. And that's under the best of terms. And now we can talk about it's transitory. Oh, no, maybe I was wrong. Maybe we need to do half basis points every month for the rest of the year and then see where it's at next year. These are scary things that the
Mhm.
experts are trying to tell us, that maybe we didn't have it right. And this is why people have gold, and this is why it offers that protection.
It's interesting. I think people think, well, if I'm investing in gold, do I actually possess the gold I have it in a safe? Do I have, how do you get gold? How do you keep gold?
Right. And physical gold. I mean, this is what we do. So, yes, if you're buying it outside of an IRA, we can deliver it right to your home, and you can put it in your own safe. You can put it in your safety deposit box. If you don't feel comfortable with that, we do offer storage for our clients as well. Okay. So, there's lots of options. In the IRA, it's stored for you, just like your IRA account. You don't have access to those stocks. So, if you were to take funds from your IRA, you could make that investment, and you'd have the retirement account invested in the precious metals as well. And it would be handled just like every other IRA account.
That's really interesting. And now I'm going to ask you a tough one, and I hope you'll forgive me, but I'm just going to be candid ask what I think might be coming to people's minds.
Sure.
If the experts in Washington are making all these mistakes, or they were wrong about inflation, then they're going to look at you and say, "Hey, Charles, why should I trust what you're telling me, and why Legacy Precious Metals is the place to go?" I'm asking this in an honest way
Sure.
because I know you want to be transparent about this stuff. So how would you answer
Absolutely.
that?
It really is I'm not a politician. I have no desire to be a politician. I like what I do, right? I help people prepare their finances. I help people with their retirements. I help people set up their funds so that their children and their grandchildren have something that's there. This is what I do. This is what I do for enjoyment. Very big in economics. Um, but metals is that thing that it's an alternative asset, right? When I was a stockbroker 30 plus years ago, it was unique kind of then. And then everybody was a stockbroker and everyone had stocks, and there was nothing different. There was no protection. Everyone said the same thing. To me, it didn't make sense for everyone to be doing the same thing. If we all do the same thing, then we all fall together. And we know that if you follow the government's direction, you're buying into whatever they want to sell you. Now, it used to be politics was a little different. We've gotten into a place where we can't say that anymore. It's not always for the people. It's we see that what they're doing with the economy itself. We know that we have to have something else, and this is why we do what we do here at Legacy. And my history is why people should give us a call, chat with us, and see if it makes sense for them.
Last thing I want to ask you about is, I remember 2008, and I know a lot of
Mm,
people do. And that was a crash, and there have been other crashes. But why is it that when the economy crashes, gold has historically risen? I know you said it's sort of the anti-dollar.
right.
Is there a way in layman's terms to explain why that happens?
It's the safe place, right? When there's so much risk out there and people are losing so much money, they just want safety.
Mhm.
So let's look at inflation. We know right now we're running close to 8.5%.
Yeah.
Uh, we can dig some real numbers out there and we can debate that, but we'll just take that number as it is. We'll use 8%. That means everything cost you 8% more this year than it did last year. And we know it's going to go higher because the Fed's already promised us a lot more interest rate raises, right? To fight inflation, but we know it's not enough. When they say things like, we'll try to raise half a basis point 5 times over the next 6 months and see where the economy's at next year, that in itself lets you know you need to find something that doesn't put your livelihood in their hands. They're juggling an economy and the stock market, and it was never meant to be that way. So you have to protect yourself. And this is where gold comes in because it is the anti dollar. The weaker the dollar gets, the stronger gold gets. And, 2008, I remember after it happened, the people that would call and try to salvage their retirement accounts. And it was a very devastating time. People would call and they would be crying that they can't retire now. They have to continue to work. They're 67 years old and their plans are gone because they lost half their value. And that's devastating. But this is where those who were involved in gold, they saw gold almost double in price. It offset the losses.
It offset the losses. So again, Charles is not suggesting that you put all your money in one
No,
place, that not even gold, but diversify your assets, and precious metals is a good way to go. And Legacy Precious Metals is the only company I trust when I talk about and do my investing in gold and silver, and you can contact them as well. LegacyPMinvestments.com, LegacyPMinvestments.com. I don't know why you would waste another minute thinking about it. Just talk to them. I mean, just ask them, see what your situation can manage and handle and might require, and just get some answers. Charles, I appreciate your time. Thanks for this. It's been very educational.
my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.